Our next speaker is bringing a very different perspective. When we started Strategy Tools work, like way back in the days, our thinking was corporates and big companies need to change. And as we have grown and evolved and we've covered different areas, you know, we've been able to work with accelerators and business schools and venture funds. And then Yona comes along and she has a challenge, a proposal, a perspective, which was just really, really, really different. So Yona, I don't know if you know this, but one of the projects I have enjoyed working on the most, which also means I've learned the most, has been with you. So joining us from Washington, D.C., Yona is with the MIT D-Lab, and she's going to be sharing some of the work she is doing on Scale-Up X. Yona, go take it away.
Great. Well, thank you for that fantastic intro. And I am just so excited to be here and to speak and really connect with the community. It's been super fun. And even the first two sessions we've had have been taking notes furiously, and it's just always learning as we go. But I'm here to share a little bit about my journey and what I've been doing with Chris for the past year. So I want to get us started with the story. So we have Dismas. He is the founder of Solar Freeze in Kenya, and he works to provide small-scale farmland with portable solar-powered cold storage units to really reduce post-harvest loss. We also have Winnie. She's the founder of Kwangu Kwako, and she builds safe, affordable, modular structures that are really used to replace informal settlements and mud shanties in Kenya. They're both, like I mentioned, Kenyan founders, and I worked with both of them about 2 years ago. They joined the accelerator that I run at MIT Lab. They came in with a goal to meet investors and raise funding by the end of the year. And I was really curious, what was their fundraising journey going to look like? And what were the outcomes going to be? And how could I support their work? As you always think about the founders that you work with. But this is anecdotal evidence. There are two founders with different perspectives. But IFC conducted a super interesting study where they looked at about 600 founders globally last year. And they really studied global data about what happened when they joined accelerators and really what was their journey like and what the financing gap looked like at the end. And one of the interesting, or maybe this is data that some people would expect, is that women founders that came out of this study really raised a lot less equity than men. In fact, about 48,000 to 104. So these are early stage founders. So not great, but the thing that was really interesting about the study is that it really looked at where the founders came in and where they ended at the end of this accelerator experience. And the thing that was really surprising to me, and it set me on this journey together with Chris, was that the funding gap was higher to begin with. So men had about a 1.8 times funding advantage over women at the beginning of joining the accelerator. But after getting a lot of investment readiness training support, that gap just got bigger. So it was about 2.6 at the end. And it was a controlled experiment. So when the researchers looked at the profile for the entrepreneurs, and they controlled for education level and entrepreneurial experience, still this gap persisted. And when they also looked at the type of the enterprises, so really digging into sector, stage, et cetera, a lot of those factors that people claim have to do with women getting less funding, still these numbers held up. So what is it? Why are accelerators failing to equally prepare or really close this gender financing gap? How is their training and curriculum suited for female entrepreneurs, or is it just designed for men to benefit a lot more out of them? So these were the questions that I started grappling with. And why do we care about this? Why is this something that should be on our radar? Well, it's because globally, it's just, whether it's emerging markets, inclusive businesses, that's the area where I focus and that's the area where I work. But really globally, a lot more money and capital flows to male founders compared to female founders. So 11% of seed funding goes to companies with a woman in a founding team. The number drops down to 2% if it's just all women or a sole female founder. And then as you get later into funding stages, then that number also goes down. So women-led businesses are undercapitalized, and the estimated gap is about 300 billion globally. And there's ripple effects. If you're not funding women-led businesses, you're not funding their customers, their perspectives, et cetera. So what is there to gain to start reversing these trends? So as Chris said, I'm in my TD lab. I run an experimental accelerator. Every year, I select a cohort of entrepreneurs and I pick a big topic, a question, and I work together to convene different stakeholders to see, can we get a different perspective on what is really happening behind there? And so for the last year and a half, my obsession has been the gender financing gap, and particularly the role of intermediaries and capacity builders. So how can we better equip accelerators to help us understand what is behind the financing gap, and what do women need to be able to work with these intermediaries and get better results? So this was a challenge. And I started asking around to see what was already out there, what kind of solutions to training entrepreneurships were out there that were different. And one of the female founders that had been in my accelerator about 4 years ago also happened to attend a session that Chris led at Catapult Ocean. And she, when she learned my journey, she said, you have to link up with Chris. And particularly, you have to look at a strategy around investment readiness in this that's packaged as a simulation that's called Scale Up. So Chris and I started talking. And I realized that basically, if I was going to go on this journey and utilize parts of what Chris had already built and built really well, I really wanted to push 4 design criteria forward. So one is this idea of gender neutral accelerators. In reality, now I call them one size fits men, because there's a lot of particular characteristics, barriers, experiences, motivations that they really fail to meet. So how can we go from one size fits men to gender smart? The second is this idea of sage on the stage. We will tell you everything that's difficult about fundraising, takes notes. Then when you're faced with investors that know so much more than you, somehow you're supposed to flip the dynamic and make it work on your side. And then there are some really incredible gender smart programs out there, but they're high touch and they're super localized. So can we really do something that's that can reach global scale? And it's not going to reach 5 female entrepreneurs here and 5 over there, but something that's really going to go and go big. So with this design criteria in mind, we did a few shifts. So we're taking Scale Up and we're really making it work for emerging markets and particularly inclusive businesses. I work with businesses that serve the needs of people living at the base of the pyramid under $4 a day. We're putting a gender journey, and we're also really revising the component of Scale Up X. I think that a lot of people here, know boom, bust, the canvases, et cetera. So how can we make those tweaks to really bring the gender journey forward? And so there's 2 journeys that have really started emerging as we designed the new prototype of the Scale Up X, which is the Female Entrepreneurship Accelerator simulation. On one side is a lot of things that you've seen. So it's the strategy, the technical skills, and the know-how around approaching everything that around scaling up an investment, whether it's term sheets, capital strategies, investor returns, exit strategies, all that good stuff that's baked into the Scale Up original simulation. But then on the other hand, can we really build another type of journey alongside this? And this journey is all around the mindsets that you need, not just to be investment ready, but to really feel investment worthy and to be able to really step into that process. So there's 3 steps that I've designed around that is awareness around the gender scenarios that you are likely to face, preparedness. So when they come their way, your way, there is some possibility, some thoughts around how you want to respond to them. And then also resilience. Fundraising is hard for everyone. It seems to be harder for female founders, but can you stick with it? And can this experience that's bottled up in this program, in this simulation, actually help you get there? And and there's particularly some gender themes that I've embedded in the simulation and in Scale Up X. These are the main 7 building blocks. I won't go through all of them. I'm happy to discuss them in more detail. But for example, access and usage of networks. Data shows that women have different types of networks. They utilize them differently. They ask different things of them. And then the people in their networks respond to the requests and to how women access investors. They respond to them differently. So that is one of the themes that's really embedded in Scale Up X and in the simulation. And how did we get here? As Chris always says, Scale Up is built on a lot of experience. So over the last year, I've been moving slow, but doing a lot of research. So to really dig into the intersectionality of experiences, I've interviewed 50 female founders. They've raised about 50K to 50 million across 20 different countries and building different types of businesses, different ages, et cetera, to come up with that kind of cluster of themes that you saw in the previous slide. I've talked to ecosystem actors, the ones that are really interested in bridging the gender financing gap, to see what their programs are to dovetail with existing initiatives, and also investors in India, because India has had a particular focus with this work. And I've also talked to accelerator and incubators. If we're building something for them, will they use it? How will they use it? How can we make something that can act as a booster to their existing programs? So where are we now?
One sec.
Oops. Where are we now? We have a prototype of,
Still on it.
Oops. I was checking the time. So where are we now? There is fortuitous timing. There's a lot happening in the global space around bridging and thinking about the gender financing gap. So what we see are these exciting, but not necessarily connected initiatives. IFC, for example, is actually providing performance-linked payments for accelerators that can boost investment for their female entrepreneurs. There are these clusters of networks that are emerging in different regions and different locations, with angels particularly that want to look for pipelines of female entrepreneurs. Other bigger institutional investors are looking to diversify what they do internally. And really, every year, we see more and more funding that goes to gender lens only funds. So we're definitely building the supply side of the equation. So let's also think about the demand side, and how can we really work with entrepreneurs and the intermediaries, whether they're universities, accelerators, et cetera, to really connect the dots. That's how I see it. And last, I want to mention this initiative that Chris and I have been part of, but globally with 2X, there's this idea of creating global emerging fund accelerator facility to really train managers that then are going to work with female founders, et cetera. And perhaps there's a 2.0 version of Scale Up X that actually feeds into, well, what do female fund managers need to also succeed? So there's a lot of movement, a lot of pieces that are out there. And in closing, you know, it's been slow, a lot of research, but I'm really fundraising to grow this program and to really launch it. The prototype of Scale Up X is almost ready in a few weeks, and we'll be doing a lot of testing, revision. So that's one of the calls that I have for this community. If you have any cohort of entrepreneurs that we could test this with, I'm super excited. And then if there's any partnerships into the next year to link up to, I'd be super excited to talk about that as well. So I will stop there and also field any questions. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this experiment.
Yona, thank you very much for sharing. And as I'm looking at this, you know, this is probably one of the areas within the entire Strategy Tools community that has the potential for the widest impact over a 3 to 5 year cycle. So, you know, whatever help you need, whatever backup or funding or anything, I'll guarantee you that there's someone here who can step in and help fill that gap if needed, when it's needed.
Wonderful. I'm excited. I think there's just so much to learn and connections to make. So, yeah.
So we have a couple of questions coming in. The first one is from Jacobo. Is the female funding gap similar in all geographies, or do you see less gap, for example, in the US and Europe versus emerging markets?
So, I mean, there's slight differences, and the numbers that I put up around 11% and 5%, they're emerging markets in general, but it's in that range. So it's a couple of percentages here, a couple of percentages there. What's interesting is how much the similarities seem to hold true for developed countries. So if you look at like female entrepreneurs in US, Europe, et cetera, versus ones in Africa, India, et cetera. So it's definitely there with some nuances. I think what's interesting to me is, for example, gaps around if there's a female founder working in emerging markets, but she is from the US, for example, then there's slightly better returns on that. So that's why I've been thinking a lot about that intersectionality of experiences. But it seems to be a global problem. And I really hope that even though a lot of the elements in Scale Up X are geared towards inclusive businesses in emerging markets, that it can really be deployed in a lot of different contexts.
So we have multiple questions in the chat, but first we're going to go to James. Go ahead, James.
Well, first of all, what a great piece of work, and I can just see massive opportunities in the continent where I'm based for this type of stuff. One thing that I kind of wondered about is how kind of community-based funding initiatives kind of interface with this. You know, if you think of the work that's been done with women's savings groups, we've got in Africa, we've got the concept of the Stokvel, which is kind of a mutual savings, a mutual funding process. Is there a way of bridging the gap between traditional sort of VC funding and those kinds of community-based funding processes in this process? Because I would imagine that could be an area where women actually would have an edge over men in terms of being able to form capital at that level.
Well, that is such a good question, and one that I've started thinking about. Particularly when I'm talking to donors that are in this space, they say, yes, but there's a sliver of entrepreneurs that get VC funding. What about the rest that are looking for different strategies to really grow their businesses? And potentially there's some modifications, but what I really loved about building upon Scale Up and doing Scale Up X was that it was a bound experiment. Clearly, there's a gap with VC fundraising and female entrepreneurship, and there isn't that a lot of great options out there. So for this first try, I kind of wanted it to be around, growth scale companies, perhaps a little bit earlier stage than the ones that this community works with, but ones that see growth through equity. But I really would love, for example, to explore with you, what could that look like, and how could we build in even some of those teasers, so some entrepreneurs that maybe do this and go through this simulation can better understand if they're not fit for equity, then what are some alternative pathways for them.
Yona, I want to take a few minutes here with you before we start wrapping up this session. So two things. Number one, 2022, it says training of trainers. How do you see people that are already in the community and have already been working with Scale Up being a part of your vision going forward?
Mm-hmm. So an excellent question. I mean, in the beginning, what I want to build is a cohort of facilitators, similarly to the cohort that is part of this community and knows how to run Scale Up, to really be comfortable with Scale Up X. So it takes a couple of people, and I really want to do a lot of testing and direct deployment. So I'm looking for people that want to be engaged and want to facilitate it and run, whether it's in their local context or with programs that have already lined up at my door and they're interested and they're just looking for opportunities to have some people work with them to run this program. So one is this cohort, and then secondly is an online version. So actually accelerator managers eventually can take it, learn how to deploy it themselves. But I think that's kind of the next milestone. I think the most important thing is building people that get familiar with it and know the gender journey nuances just as well as they know the strategic technical aspects of the fundraising.
Last comment, and Glenn, let's see if you're with us. So Glenn is currently in Panama City, and one thing I just want to show you is how this community actually starts really fitting together. So Yona, you are one of the people that we worked with that has brought the most challenges to the table. And that has, of course, fueled the development of a series of new tools around the fund managers. And I'm seeing this really moving forward with us continuing quite a lot of work around female fund managers. But yesterday, Glenn, who is in Panama City, showed us something. So let's see. Glenn, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, Chris. Good morning. Good afternoon.
So the canvas that you showed us in the Global Coaches session yesterday, that was actually developed as a consequence of the work that we've started doing here with MIT. So if you were going to give like a 1 or 2 minute summary of what was the tool and what was your takeaway from that you showed yesterday?
Sure. Yona, by the way, congrats with this initiative. It's very, very well timed and obviously very well needed across the board. So Chris asked me during our Global Coach session to look into this new canvas, First Funding Canvas, which really helps you kind of put into context, if you're starting a fund, what are some of the ambition, strategy, vision, etc. that you have. And I took a shot at it and really applied what I'm going through with a number of other investors, which is really setting up a first fund in Panama to be listed on the local stock exchange. And one of the things that the entire canvas allows you to do is to really focus on what are some of the things that are important as you go to this initial stage. So for instance, how much are you going to be raising, through which vehicle, by whom, and what are some of the challenges you're going to be facing. And I think this discussion, Chris, gives it an additional angle, which is about, how much general neutral is this fund in essence. And it's fascinating to see how these things start to come together as you think about, for instance, the portfolio of companies. As a matter of fact, I just sent a chat to some of my fellow cohorts in the investment fund to ask them how many within our current portfolio of startups are being managed and led by female. It's not something that we even are worried about, but you put it front and center as to something that is really, really driving how to close that gap that currently exists across the globe. I mean, in Latin America, it's not only do we have an issue with inequality, but if you go to the gender aspect of it, it's even worse, right? So having females get the ambition to raise equity and be able to do so is very, very important. So, Chris, my take on this is that as I go through this process and we have mapped out how to set up this initial fund, I think this additional angle would be very, very important to get it as well in there.
Super cool.
I'm sorry I missed that session. I was out last week, so I'd love to also take a look at what you have.
Sure. Chris, you're more than, I know you could share it with Yona. Chris is the one owning the board, so I don't have access to sharing.
all in due time. But Glenn, thank you very much. And Yona, I know you don't see this, but the material that Glenn was working on yesterday is a direct outcome of the conversation that we started almost a year ago. And I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing how this evolves over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.